The obsidian corridors of the apex citadel soared overhead, their polished surfaces reflecting the crimson light of Kriaris's twin suns. Chief Warden Tharok adjusted his ceremonial collar, its sharp edges digging into the thick scales of his neck. 6 cycles of service to the Red Throne had earned him this position of honor, but today's duty left a sour taste in his mouth. "Bring forth the intruder," Tharok commanded, his deep voice echoing through the vaulted chamber. 2 elite guards dragged forward a peculiar creature, so small it barely reached their waists. The human's pale skin looked sickly under the blood-red light, and its limbs were spindly compared to the robust physique of the Kriarian warriors. Yet, despite being manhandled, the creature maintained a posture of dignified calm. State your designation and purpose," Tharok demanded, towering over the diminutive being. "I am Cal, Envoy of Earth," the human replied, voice steady and clear. "I come with a diplomatic message for your empire." Laughter erupted around the chamber. Even Tharok could not suppress a rumbling chuckle. Diplomacy from Earth. The Chief Warden's golden eyes narrowed. "Your unauthorized vessel breached our outer defense ring, human. Such violations are punishable by death." Cal's expression remained placid, almost amused. "I assure you the breach was necessary. My message couldn't wait for your bureaucracy's approval." More laughter rippled through the gathered guards. One of them, Vazik, stepped forward and circled the human with exaggerated movements. "Look how tiny it is. The creatures of Earth must be desperate indeed to send such a frail specimen as their representative." Vazik extended a massive clawed hand and flicked Cal's shoulder, almost sending the human tumbling. Cal regained balance with surprising grace. "Size can be deceiving, friend, as I believe your own history teaches." The guards fell silent, their amusement curdling into suspicion. References to Kriarian history from an outsider were unwelcome at best, blasphemous at worst. Before tensions could escalate, a messenger arrived bearing the crimson seal of the Red Throne itself. Tharok broke the seal with reverent care and unfolded the message within. "The human is to be brought before the Starfang," he announced, his voice hollow with shock. The chamber erupted in astonished whispers. The Starfang, the ancient apex predator that had formed a sacred pact with the first Kriarian emperor millennia ago, rarely granted audience to the highest officials, let alone alien intruders. "There must be some mistake," Vazik protested. "The Starfang's sanctuary is forbidden to outsiders." Tharok re-examined the message, but its directive was unambiguous. "The Red Throne commands it. We depart immediately." He fixed his gaze on Cal. "You should consider this a rare honor, human. Few outsiders have gazed upon our guardian, and none have survived to speak of it." Cal merely nodded, that infuriating half-smile never leaving his face. The procession assembled quickly, 6 elite guards, Tharok at their head, and Cal in the center, unbound, but closely watched. They marched through the public corridors of the Citadel, drawing the attention of common Kriarians, going about their daily business. Many stopped to point and stare at the tiny human, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disgust. "Look at its smooth skin," one Kriarian child whispered too loudly to its parent. "Where are its scales? How does it protect itself?" "Hush," the parent admonished. "Humans are primitive creatures. That's why they must be kept far from our borders." Cal's gaze briefly met that of the child, and he offered a small wave. The young Kriarian ducked behind its parent, both fascinated and frightened. As they descended deeper into the citadel, the polished obsidian gave way to rougher stone corridors. The air grew warmer, heavy with mineral scents, and something else, something primal that sent instinctive shivers down even Tharok's spine. The guards' earlier bravado melted away, replaced by respectful silence as they approached the ancient heart of their civilization. "The Starfang has protected our people since the first ascension," Tharok explained, his voice lower now. "When the great beasts of Kriaris threatened to devour our ancestors, The first Emperor Carax formed a sacred bond with the mightiest hunter in our skies. For 10,000 cycles, the Starfang has kept us safe from external threats, and we have kept it fed and honored. A symbiotic relationship, Cal observed. Fascinating. It is more than symbiosis, Vazik hissed from behind. It is divine covenant. The Starfang chooses to protect us. We are worthy of its favor. Of course, Cal conceded with a slight nod. I meant no disrespect. They reached an immense stone doorway adorned with intricate carvings, depicting the Starfang in various poses of majestic violence, tearing apart mythical beasts, soaring through lightning storms and standing guard over cowering Kriarian figures. The symbolism was unmistakable. The Starfang was both protector and potential destroyer. Thurok approached a complex mechanism beside the door and pressed his palm against it. The ancient stone rumbled, and slowly, the massive door began to slide open, revealing a cavernous space beyond. "Last warning, human," Thurok muttered. "Bow your head in the presence of the Starfang. Speak only when addressed. And above all, show the proper reverence due to a being that could swallow you whole without noticing." "I appreciate the advice," Cal replied, straightening his simple envoy's tunic. "Shall we?" The guards formed two lines, and Thurok led Cal through the doorway into a vast, natural cavern. Unlike the manufactured precision of the citadel above, this space retained its primal character. Stalactites hung from the distant ceiling, and pools of luminescent minerals provided an eerie blue-green light. The air was noticeably warmer here, almost uncomfortably so, for the Kriarians, whose reptilian biology preferred moderate temperatures. In the center of the cavern, atop a raised dais of polished black stone, lay the Starfang. Even in repose, the creature was terrifying in its majesty. Its body stretched nearly 50 meters from snout to tail tip, covered in scales that shifted between midnight blue and cosmic black, depending on how the light struck them. 6 limbs, 4 powerfully muscled legs, and 2 great wings currently folded against its flanks suggested its incredible mobility, both on land and in air. Its head was dominated by a crown of crystalline horns that captured and refracted the cavern's light, creating dancing patterns across the walls. The Starfang appeared to be sleeping its massive chest, rising and falling in slow, rhythmic movements. Each exhalation released a breath that smelled of ozone and iron. Thurok dropped to one knee, and the guards followed suit, bowing their heads in reverence. Cal remained standing, studying the magnificent creature with undisguised fascination. "Kneel, human," Thurok growled under his breath. "If you value your life." "I mean no disrespect," Cal answered softly, "but I must remain standing for what comes next." Before Thurok could force the issue, he began the traditional greeting, his voice adopting the formal cadence of ancient Kriarian. "Great Sentinel of the Skies, Talon of the First Emperor, Eternal Guardian of Kriaris. We come bearing news. An intruder from the stars seeks audience." For several tense moments, nothing happened. The Starfang continued its deep slumber, seemingly oblivious to their presence. Thurok repeated the greeting louder, this time adding, "The Red Throne commands your attention, O Mighty One." Slowly, almost lazily, one massive eyelid slid open, revealing an orb of golden fire that seemed to burn from within. The pupil, a vertical slit of absolute darkness, contracted as it focused on the assembled group. A low rumble, felt more than heard, vibrated through the stone floor. "The human has violated our sovereign space." Thurok continued, gaining confidence, now that the ritual was proceeding as expected. "It claims to bear a message, but such transgressions cannot—" "Hello, Zell," Cal interrupted, his voice ringing clear in the cavernous space. "It's been a long time, brother." Silence crashed down like a physical force. The guards froze in horror at the blasphemy, while Thurok's mouth hung open in mid-sentence. To address the Starfang by a common name, to claim kinship with it, was beyond sacrilege. The Starfang's head rose from its resting position, both eyes now fully open and fixed on the tiny human. Its nostrils flared, drawing in Cal's scent. The rumble in its chest grew to a roar that shook loose stones from the distant ceiling. "Prepare to die human," Vazik whispered, backing toward the exit. "None survive such insolence." The massive creature unfolded from its dais, rising to its full height. Its wings extended partially, filling the cavern with their span. 6 gleaming claws dug into the stone as it padded forward, each step deliberate and predatory. Tharok found himself torn between duty and self-preservation. Protocol demanded he remain to witness the human's judgment, but primal instinct screamed at him to flee. He compromised by stepping back, giving the Starfang clear access to Cal, while maintaining his official presence. The apex predator lowered its enormous head until it was level with Cal's diminutive form. Its breath, hot and metallic, ruffled the human's hair. One flick of its jaws could end the insolent creature's existence. Instead, to the astonishment of all present, the Starfang made a sound none had heard before, a keening, almost plaintive cry that echoed with recognition. It nudged Cal gently with its snout, nearly toppling the human, who reached up without fear and placed a hand on the creature's scaled cheek. "Yes, it's me," Cal said, his voice suddenly thick with emotion. "I told you I'd come back someday." The Starfang closed its eyes and pressed its massive head against Cal's body in a gesture unmistakably like affection. When it pulled back, its golden eyes seemed different, more focused, more present than any Crearian had ever witnessed. "Impossible," Tharok whispered. "The sacred texts say nothing of this." Cal turned to address the stunned Crearians, his hand still resting on the Starfang's snout. "Your texts wouldn't mention it. This happened long before your people formed their pact with Zel." "Zel." Vazik repeated the alien name, sounding profane on his tongue. "That's his name," Cal explained. "Short for Zellerin. He was barely a hatchling when I found him injured and alone on a moon in the Cygnus sector. That was, 300 of your cycles ago." The Starfang Zel made a rumbling sound that might have been confirmation. "I nursed him back to health," Cal continued. "We traveled together for decades before he grew too large for my ship. Eventually we parted ways, but not before promising to find each other again someday." Tharok struggled to process this revelation. The foundation of Crearian society, their special covenant with the divine apex predator, was being casually rewritten by this tiny alien. "You lie," he managed finally. "The Starfang has guarded Crearis for 10,000 cycles. It is bound to the bloodline of Emperor Karax." Cal smiled sadly. "Zel is approximately 500 of your cycles old. He arrived on Crearis roughly 300 cycles ago after we separated. Whatever divine covenant your people believe in is, well, a misunderstanding at best." As if to confirm this heresy, the Starfang Zel nudged Cal again and made a series of complex vocalizations. To the shock of the assembled Crearians, Cal seemed to understand, nodding and responding with his own series of clicks and whistles. "What sorcery is this?" Vazik demanded, his hand moving to his ceremonial blade. "Not sorcery, just language," Cal explained. "Zel's species communicates through a combination of vocalizations and electromagnetic pulses. I learned his language during our time together, and he learned some of mine." The human turned back to the massive predator. "You've been lonely here, haven't you? These people worship you, but they don't know you." Zel lowered his head in what appeared to be agreement. "This is blasphemy," Tharok declared, finding his voice at last. "The Starfang is our divine protector, not some alien's pet." The word had barely left his mouth when Zel's head whipped around, eyes blazing with sudden fury. A deep, threatening growl filled the chamber, causing the guards to stumble backward in fear. "I wouldn't use that word if I were you," Cal advised calmly. "Zel is nobody's pet. He is a sentient being with his own will and choices. And right now he's telling me he's tired of being treated like a mindless guardian spirit." For the first time, Tharok felt genuine uncertainty. His entire life had been built around service to the Empire and its traditions. The Starfang was the embodiment of those traditions, a living symbol of Crearian superiority and divine favor. if what the human said was true. Prove your claim, Thurok challenged. If you truly share a bond with our guardian, prove it in a way that cannot be dismissed as trickery. Cal nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Zell and made a complex series of gestures accompanied by soft vocalizations. The great predator tilted his head considering, then stretched out one massive wing toward the cavern ceiling. The crystalline horns on Zell's head began to glow with increasing intensity, and a strange humming filled the air. Suddenly, a beam of concentrated light shot from between his horns, striking the cavern wall. Where it touched the stone, transformed, melting and reforming into a series of intricate patterns. When the light faded, a perfect star map had been etched into the wall, showing constellations no Krearian had ever seen. The Cygnus sector, Cal explained. Where I found Zell, a place no Krearian has ever visited. The detail and precision of the map were beyond what any Krearian artisan could create, and certainly beyond what any Krearian could imagine having never left their own star system. Vazik approached the wall cautiously studying the alien constellations. This proves nothing. The Starfang has divine knowledge of all the cosmos. Cal sighed. There's more. He turned back to Zell and made another series of gestures. The massive creature stretched out his neck and opened his jaws, revealing rows of gleaming teeth. But instead of a roar, a series of precise, modulated tones emerged, forming a melody that was hauntingly beautiful and utterly alien. The lullaby I used to sing to help him sleep after his injuries. Cal explained, his eyes glistening with emotion. He still remembers. The song continued, rising and falling in ways that defied Krearian musical conventions, but touched something primal in all who heard it. Several of the guards seemed transfixed, their earlier fear giving way to wonder. When the song ended, Cal turned to Thurok. Is that proof enough for you, Chief Warden? Or shall I ask Zell to show you the scar on his left flank, where I removed a meteorite fragment when he was young? Thurok found himself at a crossroads. His duty to tradition demanded he reject these claims to defend the sacred narrative that had sustained his civilization for generations. But the evidence before him was compelling. The Starfang's behavior was unprecedented in all recorded history. No Krearian had ever witnessed such displays of intelligence and emotion from their guardian. If what you say is true, Thurok said carefully, then the foundation of our imperial structure is compromised. Cal shook his head. Not necessarily. Zell chose to stay here and protect your people. That much is true. His reasons may be different from what your legends claim, but his commitment was real. He glanced up at the massive creature. Though he tells me you've been taking that commitment for granted lately. Zell rumbled in apparent agreement. What does that mean? Vazik demanded. It means, Cal explained, that Zell has been little more than a symbol for generations now. Your people no longer face the threats that once required his protection. He sits in this cavern, fed and revered, but purposeless. The accusation hung in the air, uncomfortable in its truth. The Starfang's role had indeed become largely ceremonial, brought out for imperial celebrations, and occasionally to intimidate visiting dignitaries from neighboring systems. What would you have us do? Thurok asked, surprising himself with the question. If the Starfang, if Zell is as you describe, what changes would satisfy him? Cal smiled genuinely this time. That's a start, Chief Warden. Asking what Zell wants rather than assuming you know. He turned to the great predator and engaged in another complex exchange of sounds and gestures. After several minutes, Cal nodded and turned back to the assembled Krearians. Zell wants to fly again, not just the ceremonial circuits around your capital city, but real journeys. He wants to help your people expand their horizons to explore beyond Krearis, and he wants to be treated as a partner, not a deity. Thurok frowned. The Red Throne would never. The Red Throne doesn't need to know everything immediately, Cal interrupted. Change happens gradually. Start by allowing Zell more freedom within your system. Let him hunt real prey instead of the prepared sacrifices you've been providing. Train your best warriors to ride with him to form genuine bonds. Vazik scoffed. Ride the sacred Starfang impossible? In response, Zell lowered his massive body to the ground in a clear invitation. Cal approached his flank and, with surprising agility for his size, climbed onto the predator's back, settling comfortably between two ridges of scales. Not impossible, Cal said from his perch. Just different from what you're used to. Zell and I traveled the stars together this way once. He can carry several Crearians easily. Tharok studied the scene before him, his mind racing with implications. If the human spoke truth, and increasingly he believed Cal did, then Crearian society faced a significant adjustment. But perhaps it was an adjustment long overdue. The Empire had grown stagnant, focused inward, while other civilizations explored and expanded. The Elders will resist, Tharok said finally. 10,000 cycles of tradition cannot be overturned in a day. Then don't overturn it in a day, Cal suggested. Begin with small changes. Zell and I will help. He patted the massive creature's neck affectionately. We have much to catch up on anyway. A new thought occurred to Tharok, one that sent a chill through his scaled body. You said your vessel breached our defenses to deliver a diplomatic message. What was that message if not this reunion? Cal's expression grew serious. The reunion was personal, not political. My actual message is that Earth and several allied systems have detected a spatial anomaly moving through this sector. It appears to be a remnant of the same cosmic event that separated Zell from his family centuries ago, a dimensional rift that consumes everything in its path. According to our calculations, it will reach Crearian space within 2 cycles. The guards exchanged alarmed glances. Spatial anomalies were rare, but dreaded unpredictable cosmic events that could devastate entire planets. Why would Earth warn us? Vazik asked suspiciously. Our empires have no formal relations. Because facing this threat requires cooperation, Cal explained. And because I promised Zell long ago that I would help protect whatever home he chose. He turned to the great predator. I just didn't expect that home to develop such an elaborate mythology around him. Zell made a sound that impossibly resembled a laugh. So the tiny human returns not just to reclaim our guardian, but to save us from destruction. Tharok could hardly believe the situation's rapid evolution. Hours ago, he had been prepared to execute Cal as an intruder. Now, the human claimed to hold the key to Crearis's salvation. Not to save you, Cal corrected. To help you save yourselves. Earth has technology that can detect and potentially neutralize the anomaly, but we need Crearian cooperation and Zell's unique abilities. What abilities? One of the younger guards asked, speaking for the first time. Cal smiled. Zell's species can perceive and navigate dimensional boundaries that most beings cannot. With proper guidance, he could help locate the anomaly's weak points, places where our combined technologies might seal the rift before it expands further. Tharok found himself faced with a decision that would define his legacy. Protocol demanded he report everything to the Red Throne immediately. But the Emperor's counselors were notorious for their resistance to change. They might reject Earth's warning outright, or worse, attempt to capture Cal to extract his knowledge, while maintaining their control over the Starfang. We need time, Tharok said finally. Time for Zell to demonstrate his true nature to those who will listen. Time to prepare our people for a different understanding of their guardian. Cal nodded. The anomaly gives us some time, though not much. Zell and I can remain in this sanctuary for now, reconnecting and planning. Meanwhile, you can identify which Imperial officials might be receptive to the truth. Vazik stepped forward, his earlier mockery replaced by cautious respect. Chief Warden, this is dangerous territory. If the Red Throne discovers we've concealed the human's presence. The Red Throne already knows of my presence, Cal interrupted. Your Emperor commanded I be brought here. Remember, what the throne doesn't yet know is my history with Zell or the approaching threat. That gives us room to maneuver. Tharok considered this, then turned to his guards. What we have witnessed remains in this chamber until I decree otherwise, on pain of exile. It was the strongest oath he could require for Crearians, Separation from their homeworld was a fate worse than death. One by one, the guards placed their hands over their chest scales in the traditional gesture of absolute obedience. Even Vazik, after a moment's hesitation, complied. "We will return at dawn," Tharok announced. "By then, human, I expect a more detailed explanation of this spatial anomaly and how you propose we address it." "You'll have it," Cal promised. "And please call me Cal. If we're going to save Kriaris together, we should at least be on a first-name basis." After the Kriarians departed, sealing the massive door behind them, Cal slid down from Zell's back and stood before the great predator. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other, the tiny human and the massive apex predator, reunited after centuries apart. "They're not bad people, you know," Cal said softly, "just limited by their understanding." Zell lowered his head until his golden eye was level with Cal's face. A low, rumbling purr emanated from deep in his chest. "I know you've been lonely," Cal continued, placing his hand on the creature's snout. "So have I. But we're together now, and we have work to do, important work that will honor your decision to protect this world." The great predator closed his eyes, leaning into Cal's touch with surprising gentleness for a being of such immense power. In the quietness of the cavern, two old friends began to rebuild a bond that spanned centuries and light years, a bond that might prove the salvation of an empire that had never truly known the Guardian at its heart. Dawn on Kriaris brought a spectacle of color as the twin suns crested the horizon in sequence. First the smaller crimson star, followed by its larger golden companion. Their combined light filtered through crystal spires of the capital city, casting prismatic patterns across the obsidian corridors of the Apex Citadel. Tharok had not slept. After leaving the Starfang Sanctuary, he had retreated to his private chambers to contemplate the day's revelations. His entire life had been dedicated to the imperial traditions, the belief that the Starfang was a divine entity, bound to Kriaris by ancient covenant. To discover that their guardian was in fact a cosmic traveler, with a personal connection to a diminutive alien. It threatened to unravel everything. Yet he could not deny what he had witnessed. The Starfang Zell had displayed behaviors never recorded in Imperial history. The creature's intelligence, its emotional response to Cal, its ability to communicate and remember. These suggested a sentient being far more complex than the semi-divine protector of Kriarian mythology. As promised, Tharok returned to the sanctuary at dawn, this time accompanied only by Vazik, his most trusted lieutenant. They found Cal seated cross-legged on the stone floor, apparently deep in meditation. Zell was curled around him in a protective semicircle, one wing partially extended to shield the human from the cavern's dripping moisture. The scene struck Tharok as both bizarre and strangely moving, the galaxy's most fearsome predator, acting as shelter for a creature it could swallow without effort. "Your timing is excellent," Cal said without opening his eyes. "We were just discussing the best approach to the anomaly problem." "Discussing," Vazik repeated skeptically. Cal finally opened his eyes and smiled. "Zell's species communicates partially through electromagnetic fields. When we're in close proximity, we can share thoughts without vocalizing." He stood up, stretching limbs that must have grown stiff from the stone floor. Zell uncurled himself, his massive body unfolding with liquid grace despite its size. "I've prepared a preliminary report on the spatial anomaly." Cal continued producing a small device from his tunic. "This contains everything Earth knows about the phenomenon, including its projected path through Kriarian space." Tharok accepted the device cautiously. "Our technicians will need to adapt this to our systems." "Already taken care of," Cal assured him. "The data is formatted for compatibility with your Imperial archives. One of the benefits of having studied your civilization for some time." This casual admission that Earth had been observing Kriaris undetected was troubling, but Tharok set the concern aside for now. The immediate threat demanded priority. "You mentioned that Zell possesses abilities that could help address this anomaly," Tharok prompted. Cal nodded, turning to the great predator with obvious pride. Zell's species evolved in a region of space where dimensional barriers are naturally thin. They developed sensory organs capable of detecting fluctuations that most beings, including your people and mine, cannot perceive. More importantly, they can generate bioelectromagnetic fields that can either strengthen or weaken those barriers. You're saying the Starfang Zell can manipulate the fabric of space? Vazek asked, unable to hide his amazement. On a limited scale, yes, Cal confirmed. Not enough to close the anomaly entirely, but enough to identify its weak points and stabilize them, while our combined technologies do the heavy lifting. Tharok frowned. If Zell possesses such abilities, why has he never demonstrated them in all his time on Kriaris? Cal's expression grew somber. Because you never asked. You placed him on a pedestal, or more accurately on that stone dais, and expected him to play the role your legends prescribed. You never tried to discover who he really was. The criticism stung, but Tharok recognized its validity. The Kriarian approach to the Starfang had always been one of reverent distant ceremonial offerings and ritual supplications, but never true interaction. How do you propose we proceed? Tharok asked, pushing past his discomfort. Cal and Zell exchanged a look that somehow conveyed volumes, despite the vast differences in their physiologies. First, Cal said, we need to establish a direct line of communication between your scientific authorities and mine. Earth has been tracking similar anomalies for decades, and we've developed technologies specifically designed to address them. The Red Throne will never approve direct contact with Earth, Vazek objected. Our isolation policies are absolute. Your isolation policies may cost you your planet if you insist on maintaining them, Cal replied sharply. This anomaly isn't concerned with Kriarian tradition. Before tensions could escalate, Zell made a low, harmonious sound that seemed to resonate through the cavern. Both Kriarians found themselves instinctively calming in response. Zell suggests a compromise, Cal translated. We begin preparations without official Imperial sanction, gathering the necessary resources and personnel quietly. Meanwhile, he will make a rare public appearance, a ceremonial flight over the capital, that will subtly demonstrate new abilities, preparing your people for the changes to come. Tharok considered this approach. It was risky, bordering on treason, but potentially effective. The common citizens of Kriaris would be more receptive to change if it came from their revered guardian. And what of the Red Throne? Tharok asked. The Emperor must eventually be informed. Of course, Cal agreed. But presented properly, this could be framed as an evolution of the Imperial Covenant, rather than its negation. The Starfang hasn't abandoned Kriaris. He's expanding his role to face a new threat. Vazek looked skeptical. The Imperial theologians have spent millennia interpreting the nature of our pact with the Starfang. They won't simply accept a rewrite of their doctrine. Then perhaps it's time for new theologians, Cal suggested. Or better yet, a direct demonstration of Zell's true nature to the Emperor himself. No intermediaries, no interpreters, just the truth. The idea was radical, unprecedented. Direct audience with the Emperor was reserved for the highest officials and most sacred rituals. For a foreign envoy to propose such a meeting was audacious at best. Yet Tharok found himself considering it seriously. The Empire faced potential extinction from this approaching anomaly. If traditional channels would impede their response, perhaps traditional protocols needed to be set aside. There is one who might help us, Tharok said slowly. Dr. Laris Zen, chief astronomer to the Imperial Court. She has long argued for expanded study of cosmic phenomena, often against the theologians' objections. If anyone would be receptive to Earth's warnings, it would be her. Cal nodded. Perfect. Arrange a meeting as soon as possible here in Zell's sanctuary, where we can speak freely. And in the meantime, Vazek asked. In the meantime, Cal replied with a small smile. Zell and I have 3 centuries of catching up to do, and I believe he's eager to stretch his wings beyond the ceremonial flight paths you've restricted him to. As if in response, Zell unfurled his magnificent wings to their full span, the membranous surfaces shimmering with patterns that resembled starfields in motion. The sight was breathtaking, a reminder that for all their reverence, the Crearians had never truly appreciated the living marvel at the heart of their empire. "There is an old hunting preserve in the southern mountains," Tharok suggested, surprising himself with the offer. "It was established centuries ago for the Starfang's use, though in recent generations it has become merely ceremonial. Perhaps Zell would appreciate a chance to hunt there again without the constraints of ritual." Cal glanced up at the massive predator, who rumbled in what could only be described as eager anticipation. "He would like that very much," Cal confirmed. "And it would give us a chance to begin testing his dimensional senses, away from prying eyes." Tharok nodded decisively. "It's settled then. I'll arrange transport to the preserve and a private meeting with Dr. Zen. Vazik will ensure both events remain confidential." As they finalized the details, Tharok found himself studying Cal with new interest. The human's size had initially led him to dismiss the envoy as inconsequential, a mistake that had nearly cost Crearis its future. It was a humbling revelation for a society that had long equated physical stature with power and importance. "There is one more thing you should know," Cal said, as they prepared to depart. "The anomaly that threatens Crearis is not entirely natural. We've detected signs of technological manipulation. Someone or something is deliberately directing its path." "An attack," Vazik demanded, hand instinctively moving to his weapon. "We don't know yet," Cal admitted. "But the pattern of its movements suggests intelligence. Earth has encountered similar phenomena near other inhabited systems. In each case, the anomaly diverted toward populated worlds when it could have continued through empty space. This new information cast an even darker shadow over the situation. An unavoidable natural disaster was one thing. A deliberate assault was another entirely." "Do you have theories about who might be responsible?" Tharok asked. Cal hesitated, exchanging another of those meaningful looks with Zell. "There are legends among Zell's people about ancient entities that exist in the spaces between dimensions, beings that feed on the energy released when normal space is disrupted. They call them the Void Harvesters." "Legends," Tharok repeated skeptically. "You base your concerns on myths." "All myths contain kernels of truth, Chief Warden," Cal replied. "Your own legends about the Starfang weren't entirely false, just incomplete. Besides, whether the Void Harvesters exist as described or not, something is guiding these anomalies. We need to be prepared for the possibility that we face not just a phenomenon, but an adversary." The implications were staggering. Crearian military doctrine had always focused on conventional threats: rival empires, pirate fleets, the occasional rebellion. The idea of a force that weaponized space itself was beyond their strategic thinking. "All the more reason to move quickly," Tharok concluded. "We'll depart for the hunting preserve at dusk when fewer eyes will mark our passage." As the Crearians turned to leave, Cal called after them. "Chief Warden, a question if I may. Why are you helping us yesterday? You were ready to execute me as an intruder. Today, you risk your position to embrace a truth that contradicts your empire's fundamental beliefs. Why?" Tharok paused, considering the question carefully. "I have served the Red Throne for 6 cycles human. In that time I have watched our empire grow increasingly rigid, increasingly focused on maintaining traditions rather than understanding why they exist. We worship the Starfang, but never sought to know him. We guard our borders, but never ask what lies beyond them." He gestured toward Zell. "Perhaps it is time we remembered that even apex predators must adapt to survive." With that, he and Vazik departed, leaving Cal and Zell alone once more in the ancient sanctuary. As the massive stone door sealed behind the Crearians, Cal turned to his old friend with a weary smile. "That went better than expected." Zell lowered his enormous head to nuzzle Cal's shoulder gently, a gesture that would have terrified any Crearian observer. The complex electromagnetic field that represented the Predator's thoughts brushed against Cal's consciousness, conveying emotions too nuanced for simple categorization. "I know," Cal responded to the unspoken communication. "I missed you too, old friend. And yes, I'm sorry it took me so long to find you. The galaxy is a big place, and you left quite a trail of legends behind you." The great predator settled back onto his haunches, golden eyes fixed on Cal, with an intensity that would have unnerved anyone unfamiliar with Zell's species. To Cal, it was simply the focused attention of a highly intelligent being. "You chose an interesting world to call home." Cal continued pacing around the cavern. "The Crearians have potential despite their rigid society. Their technological development is impressive, if somewhat narrowly focused on defense and stability, rather than exploration." Zell made a series of harmonic rumbles that Cal interpreted easily, after their centuries of companionship. "Yes, I noticed that too. They've built their entire culture around you without ever really seeing you. Must have been frustrating." Cal paused, studying the elaborate carvings that adorned the sanctuary walls. Stylized depictions of the Starfang defending Crearis, from various threats, most of which were clearly mythologized. "Though I suppose being worshipped has its advantages. You've certainly been well fed." Another rumble, this one, tinged with something like embarrassment. "Don't worry, I'm not judging. We all do what we must to survive." Cal placed his hand on Zell's massive foreclaw. "But now, we have a chance to show them the truth not just about you, but about the wider universe, and perhaps save this world in the process." The truth about the spatial anomaly was more complex than Cal had revealed to Tharok. Earth scientists had indeed detected technological manipulation, but they had also discovered something else, a quantum signature remarkably similar to that produced by Zell's species. It was as if whatever guided the anomaly was using a corrupted version of the dimensional abilities that came naturally to Zell's kind. That connection was why Cal had finally tracked down his old friend after centuries of separation. If anyone could understand and potentially counter the anomaly, it would be Zell, especially now that he had matured into the full power of his species. "We'll need to test the extent of your abilities," Cal said, more seriously now. "It's been a long time since we practiced dimensional sensing together, and you were just a juvenile then. Based on your size and the crystalline development of your horn crown, I'd say you've reached full maturity, which means your dimensional sensitivity should be at its peak." Zell raised his head proudly, the crystalline structures glinting in the cavern's low light. Through their electromagnetic bond, he conveyed a complex series of impressions: confidence in his abilities, eagerness to use them for more than ceremonial displays, and underlying it all, joy at being truly seen and understood again after centuries of being merely venerated. "I know exactly how you feel," Cal said with a smile. "Being a diplomat means I'm often treated as a function, rather than a person too." He stretched his arms above his head, working out the stiffness from a night spent on stone. "Let's make a deal, old friend. We'll save this world of yours, show its people who you really are, and then perhaps it's time for both of us to do some more exploring. The galaxy has changed since our last adventure together." Zell's response was immediate and enthusiastic, a cascading series of harmonic purrs that conveyed absolute agreement. The crystalline horns on his head began to glow slightly, a physiological response to emotional excitement that the Crearians had always interpreted as divine manifestation. "It's settled then," Cal declared, his earlier weariness replaced by determination. "But first we have an anomaly to deal with, and an empire to enlighten. Let's not waste the time we have before Tharok returns." With that, human and predator began their preparations. Cal retrieving additional equipment from hidden compartments in his envoy's garments. Zell focusing his senses on the dimensional fabric surrounding Crearis. Together, they formed a strange but formidable team, the tiny human and the apex predator, bound by a friendship that transcended species, space, and time. As the day progressed, neither was aware that their reunion and plans were being observed through means beyond conventional Crearian surveillance. In the shadows between dimensions, ancient intelligences noted the presence of a mature dimensional skyrider, as Zell's species was known to them, and the curious small being who communicated with it. Such a pairing was unexpected and potentially problematic for the approaching harvest. Adjustments would need to be made. The southern hunting preserve sprawled across 3 mountain ranges, encompassing diverse ecosystems, from dense forests to rocky highlands. Originally established as a natural habitat for the starfang's prey species, it had gradually transformed into a ceremonial space where captive-bred animals were released just before the Guardian's biannual hunts, a pale imitation of true predation. Transporting Zell there required careful planning. Though the starfang traditionally flew on his own during official ceremonies, Tharok arranged for a massive cargo lifter to carry him under cover of darkness, minimizing public visibility. The official explanation, a routine relocation for sanctuary maintenance, would satisfy casual inquiries. Cal traveled separately with Tharok and Vazik in a smaller shuttle, using the journey to elaborate on Earth's understanding of the spatial anomaly. Our scientists call it a dimensional fissure, Cal explained, displaying holographic models on his portable device. Imagine reality as a fabric. Normally it's stable, but certain forces can create tears in that fabric, tears that expose the void between dimensions. And these void harvesters live in this between space? Vazik asked, still clearly skeptical of the concept. Not live in the way we understand life, Cal clarified. They're more like patterns of energy that achieve a form of consciousness. They don't breathe, eat, or reproduce as biological entities do. They consume energy, specifically the energy released when dimensional barriers are strained or broken. Tharok studied the holographic representation with growing concern. The anomaly appeared as a writhing distortion in space, its edges constantly shifting, but its general direction unmistakably aimed toward Kriarian territory. If this model is accurate, the anomaly will reach our outer defense network within 15 days, he observed grimly. Correct, Cal confirmed. And conventional weapons will be useless against it. Energy-based defenses would actually strengthen it, while physical projectiles would simply pass through. Then what defense do we have? Vazik demanded. Dimensional reinforcement, Cal replied. Think of it as repairing the fabric before it tears completely. Earth has developed technologies that can generate stabilizing fields at a dimensional fissure's edges, preventing it from expanding further. Combined with Zell's natural abilities to manipulate those same dimensional boundaries, we believe we can not only halt the anomaly's advance, but potentially seal it entirely. And these technologies, Earth would share them with Kriaris. Tharok's tone suggested he found such generosity suspect. Of course, Cal said simply. This isn't the first such anomaly we've encountered, and it won't be the last. Earth's policy is to assist any civilization threatened by dimensional disruption. Partly from altruism, yes, but also from pragmatism. Each unsealed fissure makes future incidents more likely. The shuttle began its descent toward the preserve's central complex, a series of stone structures built to resemble natural formations, allowing observation of the starfang's activities without disrupting the wilderness aesthetic. Dr. Zen will meet us at dawn, Tharok informed them as they landed. She's traveled under the pretext of a routine astronomical survey, which gives us approximately 12 hours before questions arise about her actual whereabouts. The cargo lifter carrying Zell was already settling onto a massive landing pad designed for the starfang's ceremonial arrivals. As its bay doors opened, the great predator emerged with an eager grace that belied his enormous size. Without waiting for formal release, he spread his wings and launched himself skyward with a roar that echoed across the mountains. Vazik flinched at this departure from protocol. The starfang has never left without the ritual dismissal prayers. Cal watched his old friend soar into the night sky, performing aerial maneuvers that no Kriarian had ever witnessed, tight spirals, sudden dives, and gravity-defying recoveries that showcased his true agility. He's been constrained for too long, Cal observed. Give him this moment of freedom. He'll return when he's ready. Tharok seemed less concerned with the breach of tradition and more impressed by the display of power. I've observed every ceremonial flight for 6 cycles, yet never have I seen the star. Never have I seen Zell move like that. Because you never permitted it, Cal replied, without accusation. Your ceremonial flight paths were designed for public visibility and religious significance, not for a flying predator's natural movement patterns. As they watched, Zell climbed higher until he was merely a silhouette against the stars. Suddenly, the crystalline structures on his head began to glow with intense, blue-white light, visible even at such distance. A moment later, he dove toward the forest below, moving with such speed that he seemed to blur. Just before impact, Zell pulled up sharply, skimming the treetops. Where his path crossed the forest, brief flashes of light burst from the canopy, followed by the sounds of startled wildlife. "What was that?" Vazik demanded. Cal smiled. "Dimensional echolocation. He's scanning for prey by sending out pulses that temporarily highlight living creatures across dimensional boundaries. It's how his species hunts naturally. The sacred texts describe the starfang as having the gaze that pierces shadow," Tharok recalled. "We interpreted it metaphorically as seeing through deception, but it was literal. Most myths begin with observations of real phenomena," Cal noted. "They simply get elaborated and reinterpreted over time until the original meaning is lost." Zell continued his hunt through the night, occasionally returning to the complex to show off particularly impressive catches: mountain grazers and tree-dwelling predators that had long adapted to avoid conventional hunters. Each time, he would deposit his prey near the observation platform, rumble proudly, and launch himself back into the darkness. Cal used these brief returns to conduct preliminary tests of Zell's dimensional sensitivity, measuring the range and precision of his abilities with instruments from his diplomatic kit. Tharok observed these interactions with fascination, noting the ease and familiarity between human and predator. "You truly understand each other," he remarked during one such exchange. "Understanding comes from respect," Cal replied, calibrating a sensor against Zell's crystalline horns. "I never assumed I knew what was best for Zell, or what he was thinking. I asked and then I listened, even when the answer wasn't what I expected." The implicit criticism of Kriarian approaches wasn't lost on Tharok, but he accepted it without defensiveness. The evidence of his civilization's misconceptions was soaring above them, demonstrating capabilities no imperial record had ever documented. Dawn arrived with a riot of color as the twin suns crested the eastern mountains. Zell returned from his night of hunting and freedom, settling onto the main platform with visible satisfaction. His scales gleamed with renewed luster, and his movements seemed more fluid and powerful than before. "One night of natural behavior has already improved his physical condition," Cal noted. "Imagine what might happen if your empire treated him as a partner rather than a symbol." Before Tharok could respond, a sleek atmospheric shuttle approached from the north, Dr. Zen's arrival. The craft landed with precision on a secondary pad, and a single figure emerged hurrying toward the observation platform with evident eagerness. Dr. Laris Xen belied the Kriarian stereotype of imposing physical presence. She was smaller than Tharok by a full head, her scales a muted bronze rather than the vibrant crimson of military castes. But her eyes, a startling violet rare among her species, held an intensity that commanded attention. "Chief Warden." She greeted Tharok formally, then immediately focused on Cal. "And you must be the Earth envoy I've heard whispers about. Fascinating. I've never had the opportunity to study human physiology up close." "Dr. Zen," Cal acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. When the Chief Warden mentions a matter of astronomical urgency, requiring absolute discretion, only a fool would hesitate," she replied briskly. Her gaze shifted to Zell, who was studying her with equal curiosity. "And the opportunity to observe the starfang outside ceremonial constraints. That alone would have justified the journey." Tharok began to introduce them formally, but Zen had already moved past social protocols, circling Zell with the focused attention of a scientist cataloging observations. "The crystalline formations on the cranial ridge, they're photoactive, aren't they? and the scale patterning suggests adaptation to both atmospheric and vacuum environments. Remarkable. She turned abruptly to Cal. The theological texts claim the starfang was sent by the cosmic deities, but its physiology clearly indicates evolutionary adaptation to specific environmental pressures. I've argued this for years, but the imperial censors restrict publication of such research. Cal exchanged an amused glance with Zell. Dr. Zen, I believe you and I will work together quite effectively. And yes, Zell's species evolved in a region of space where dimensional boundaries naturally fluctuate. The crystalline structures allow him to detect and manipulate those boundaries. Zen repeated, her violet eyes widening. The starfang has a name. He has always had a name, Cal replied. Your people simply never asked what it was. Rather than taking offense, Zen nodded thoughtfully. Logical. We built our understanding on observation without communication, a fundamental methodological error. She turned her attention back to Zell. May I approach more closely? I assure you my interest is scientific, not religious. To everyone's surprise, perhaps even Cal's, Zell lowered his massive head directly before Zen, bringing his golden eyes level with hers. The scientist stood her ground, meeting that intense gaze without flinching. Extraordinary, she whispered. The pupils contract independently of light levels, suggesting emotional or cognitive responses affect their dilation. Cal smiled. He likes you, Doctor. Scientists are rare among those who approach him, and he appreciates curiosity over reverence. As do I, Zen replied, still maintaining eye contact with the enormous predator. After a moment of silent communion, she turned back to Cal. The chief warden mentioned a spatial anomaly threatening Crearian space. I assume this relates to the dimensional boundaries you referenced. Cal activated his holographic display again, showing the detailed model of the approaching fissure. This is what we're facing, Doctor. A dimensional tear moving through space deliberately guided toward inhabited systems. Zen studied the model with remarkable composure, asking precise technical questions that revealed her expertise extended well beyond conventional Crearian astronomy. When Cal mentioned the theoretical void harvesters, rather than dismissing the concept as Tharok and Vazek had, she immediately began correlating it with Crearian legends. The ancient texts speak of devourers between stars, that the first emperor and the starfang fought together, she noted. Most theologians interpret this as allegorical, representing the triumph of civilization over chaos. But if these void harvesters are real entities, the allegory might have started as a historical account, Cal finished. Exactly. Zen turned to Tharok. Chief Warden, this threatens not just our empire, but our entire understanding of reality. We must establish direct communication with Earth scientists immediately. That would require imperial authorization, Tharok reminded her. Which would mean explaining everything to the Red Throne. Then explain it, Zen said firmly. The Emperor may be bound by tradition, but he is not a fool. When faced with extinction, even the most conservative institutions become flexible. Cal intervened before the discussion could devolve into internal politics. While official channels are being established, we can begin preliminary work here. Dr. Zen, I'd like to share Earth's dimensional stabilization protocols with you, and then we need to conduct a more thorough assessment of Zell's current abilities. The next several hours passed in intensive collaboration. Zen proved to be not only knowledgeable, but adaptable quickly, grasping concepts that would have seemed heretical to more traditional Crearian scientists. She and Cal established a framework for integrating Earth's technology with Crearian systems, while Tharok and Vazek began identifying military resources that could be quietly reassigned to the preservation without raising immediate questions. Throughout these preparations, Zell remained engaged, sometimes observing, sometimes demonstrating specific abilities at Cal's request. His dimensional sense proved even more acute than Cal had hoped, able to detect subtle fluctuations at remarkable distances. By midday, they had developed the outline of a response plan. Earth would dispatch specialized equipment officially classified as scientific exchange materials rather than military technology. Crearian defense forces would be repositioned under the pretext of routine exercises. Meanwhile, Zell would begin systematic scanning of the space surrounding Crearis, mapping dimensional weaknesses that might attract or accelerate the anomaly's approach. These preparations will buy us time, Cal explained, but eventually, we'll need official Imperial support for a coordinated response. The anomaly is too large to address with piecemeal resources. Thurok nodded grimly. I will request an audience with the Emperor tomorrow. Dr. Zen's data and your Earth technologies provide compelling evidence that should overcome even the theologian's objections. And if it doesn't? Vazek asked, voicing the concern they all shared. Then we act without authorization, Thurok replied, with a firmness that surprised them all. My oath is to protect Crearis, not merely to uphold its traditions. Zen's respect for the Chief Warden visibly increased. A refreshing perspective from the military caste. Perhaps there is hope for our Empire's evolution after all. Their planning session was interrupted by an urgent alert from the atmospheric sensors. A squadron of Imperial shuttles was approaching from the capital, unscheduled and unannounced. We've been discovered, Vazek warned, moving to secure the sensitive materials they had been reviewing. Thurok accessed the preserved surveillance systems, his expression darkening as he identified the lead craft. Worse, it's Archtheologian Krivat and his ceremonial guard. They must have learned of the Starfang's removal from the sanctuary. Cal exchanged a concerned look with Zell. This complicates matters. The Archtheologian is unlikely to embrace our revised understanding of Zell's nature. Krivat is the most conservative voice on the Imperial Council, Zen explained. He has personally blocked my research dozens of times, claiming scientific inquiry threatens the sacred mysteries. Hide the Earth technologies, Thurok ordered. Dr. Zen, you're here conducting authorized astronomical observations. Vazek and I are performing a routine security assessment of the preserve. Cal? He hesitated clearly, uncertain how to explain the human's presence. I'll handle Krivat, Cal said confidently. Just follow my lead. The Imperial shuttles landed in formation, disgorging 24 guards in ceremonial armor, followed by a tall, gaunt Crearian, whose elaborate vestments marked him as a high religious official. Archtheologian Krivat moved with deliberate slowness, his ancient scales faded to a pale orange that contrasted sharply with the vibrant reds and golds of his ceremonial robes. Chief Warden Thurok, Krivat, called out, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. Explain this sacrilege. The Starfang's Sacred Communion Day approaches yet. I find its sanctuary empty, and the Divine Guardian relocated without proper rituals. Thurok stepped forward and executed a formal bow. Archtheologian, I acted on information suggesting a potential threat to the Starfang's well-being. The relocation was temporary and conducted with all possible respect. Krivat's eyes narrowed as he noticed Cal standing near Zell. And what is this creature, an alien in the Divine Guardian's presence? Have you lost all sense of propriety? Before Thurok could respond, Cal stepped forward and performed a flawless rendition of the traditional greeting to Crearian religious authorities, a complex series of gestures that few outsiders would know. Honored Archtheologian, I am Cal of Earth here by invitation of the Red Throne itself to discuss matters of mutual concern between our worlds. Krivat seemed momentarily taken aback by Cal's knowledge of Crearian protocol, but quickly recovered his authoritative demeanor. No invitation to an alien could possibly extend to proximity with the Starfang. The sacred texts are explicit. The Divine Guardian's presence is reserved for the purified. Cal smiled diplomatically. Perhaps those texts deserve re-examination in light of new revelations. Revelations. Krivat's voice dripped with disdain. What could an Earth creature possibly reveal about our sacred guardian? At this, Zell, who had been watching the exchange with apparent interest, rose to his full height and extended his wings in a display that even the Archtheologian could not ignore. The crystalline horns on his head began to glow with increasing intensity, casting prismatic patterns across the assembly. "The Starfang speaks!" Krivat gasped, immediately dropping to his knees. The ceremonial guards followed suit, bowing their heads in reverence. Cal, however, remained standing. "Not exactly speaking arch-theologian. Zell is expressing frustration at being discussed as if he weren't present, and capable of understanding every word." "Zell," Krivat repeated, outrage overcoming his momentary awe. "You dare assign a common name to the Divine Guardian?" "I didn't assign anything," Cal replied calmly. "That is his name, the name he bore before he ever encountered Kriaris, before your empire incorporated him into your theology." The arch-theologian rose shakily to his feet, trembling with indignation. "Blasphemy guards, arrest this creature for sacrilege against the divine covenant." The ceremonial guards hesitated, looking uncertainly between their religious leader and the imposing presence of Zell, who had begun emitting a low, warning rumble. Thurok seized the moment of confusion to assert his own authority. "The human is under my protection by direct order of the Red Throne Arch-Theologian. Any action against him would require imperial countermand." Krivat turned his fury on Thurok. "You have been corrupted by alien influence, Chief Warden, the sanctity of our traditions." He was interrupted by a thunderous roar from Zell, so powerful it sent vibrations through the stone platform. When silence returned, Cal spoke in the same calm tone. "Zell suggests we dispense with arguments about tradition and focus on the approaching threat to Kriaris. Perhaps you would be interested to learn that the Devourers between stars, mentioned in your earliest texts, are returning arch-theologian. The very entities that the first emperor and Zell supposedly fought together." This reference to obscure theological lore caught Krivat off guard. "How could you possibly know of the Devourer legends?" "Those texts are restricted to the highest theological ranks." "Because Zell was there," Cal replied simply. "He remembers the entities your legends call Devourers. They're real. They're approaching Kriarian space, and they represent an existential threat to your civilization." Dr. Zen stepped forward, seizing the opportunity Cal had created. "Arch-theologian, I have astronomical data confirming the approach of an anomaly that matches the description in the ancient texts. If you would examine the evidence—" "Silence, Zen. Your scientific heresies are well known to the Theological Council." Krivat's dismissal was automatic, but his eyes remained fixed on Zell, whose behavior was so far removed from the ceremonial performances he was accustomed to that he could not entirely reject what he was witnessing. Cal recognized the moment of uncertainty and pressed his advantage. "Arch-theologian, consider this: what if the earliest texts contain literal truth that was gradually obscured by metaphorical interpretation? What if the first Emperor Carax actually did fight alongside Zell against a cosmic threat, not through mystical communion, but through practical partnership?" Krivat's expression wavered between outrage and reluctant curiosity. "The sacred texts are not to be questioned by outsiders." "I'm not questioning them," Cal countered. "I'm suggesting they may be more accurate than even you realize. The Void Harvesters, the Devourers between stars, are returning. Zell senses them, just as he did centuries ago. The question is not whether your texts are valid, but whether your interpretation serves Kriaris in its hour of need." Thurok, recognizing the shift in Krivat's demeanor, added his own argument. "Arch-theologian, my duty is to the security of the Empire. If there is even a possibility that this threat is real, we cannot afford to dismiss it on doctrinal grounds." For several tense moments, Krivat stood in silence, his internal conflict evident in his rigid posture. Finally, he turned to Cal with narrowed eyes. "You claim the Starfang, this Zell, can communicate its thoughts to you?" "Yes," Cal confirmed, "through a combination of vocalizations, electromagnetic fields, and shared history." "Then prove it," Krivat challenged. "Have the Divine Guardian reveal something only it would know, something from the sacred communion that no alien could possibly have learned." It was a clever trap. If Cal claimed knowledge of the private rituals between the Starfang and the Imperial theologians, Krevat could accuse him of espionage. If he failed to produce such knowledge, his claim of communication would be discredited. Cal smiled unfazed by the challenge. Zell doesn't particularly concern himself with your communion rituals, arch-theologian. Their performances you created, not genuine exchanges. But he does remember something from your personal history that might interest you. The human turned to the great predator, engaging in what appeared to be silent communion for several moments. Zell's golden eyes remained fixed on Krevat, who shifted uncomfortably under that penetrating gaze. Zell recalls an incident 72 cycles ago, Cal finally said. A young theological acolyte came alone to the sanctuary after hours breaking all protocols. This acolyte, you Krevat, didn't come to worship but to ask questions. You spoke to the Starfang directly, asking if the divine being was truly happy, being confined to the ceremonial role the Empire had created. Krevat's scales paled visibly. That's impossible. No one knew of that visit. Zell knew, Cal replied simply. He remembers your sincerity, your genuine concern for his well-being. He appreciated that more than all the formal rituals that followed in your later career. The arch-theologian stared at Zell, his carefully constructed worldview visibly crumbling. I never received an answer, he whispered. I returned to my duties convinced that my question had been presumptuous. He couldn't answer you then, Cal explained gently. You weren't prepared to recognize his response. But he can answer now through me, no. He has not been happy in the role your empire created for him. He has been honored, revered, but profoundly lonely until now. Krevat sank slowly to his knees again, but this time not in ceremonial reverence. The gesture seemed one of genuine emotional response, perhaps even relief. All these cycles, he murmured. All the rituals, the doctrine, the theological debates. And we never simply asked what the divine guardian wanted. Dr. Zen approached cautiously, offering a datapad. Arch-theologian, the astronomical data. If you would review it, not as a challenge to doctrine, but as potential confirmation of your earliest texts. This time, Krevat accepted the device, studying the information with a scholar's focused attention, rather than a zealot's dismissive glance. After several minutes of silence, he looked up at Tharok. This anomaly. It matches the descriptions in the first Emperor's personal chronicles. Not the public text, the private records kept in the most restricted section of the Imperial Archives. Then you understand the urgency of our situation, Tharok replied, and why conventional responses may be insufficient. Krevat rose to his feet, his demeanor subtly transformed. The rigid authority remained but tempered now, with something approaching intellectual curiosity. I will need to consult the original texts, he declared. Not the interpreted versions taught in the theological academies, but the actual historical records. He turned to Cal. If what you claim is true, if the Starfang is indeed a being with its own history and desires independent of our theological framework, then much of what I have taught must be reconsidered. Reconsideration isn't rejection, Cal offered diplomatically. Your traditions honored Zell, even if they didn't fully understand him. There's value in that history, even as you create a new chapter. The arch-theologian seemed to appreciate this concession to the validity of his life's work. Chief Warden, I withdraw my objection to the Starfangs to Zell's relocation for now. But I expect to be included in all further discussions regarding both this anomaly and the revised understanding of our guardian. Of course, arch-theologian Tharok agreed readily. Your theological expertise will be valuable in reinterpreting the historical accounts that may contain practical information about the previous encounter with these entities. This acknowledgement of his continued relevance seemed to satisfy Krevat. I will return to the capital and access the restricted archives immediately. Dr. Zen, your astronomical observations may prove useful in correlating the ancient descriptions with current phenomena. Zen bowed respectfully, hiding her surprise at this unprecedented collaboration. I would be honored to assist arch-theologian. As Krevat prepared to depart with his ceremonial guard, he paused before Zell, studying the massive predator with new eyes. Is it true that you remember me from all those cycles ago? Cal translated the question, though Zell had clearly understood. The great predator lowered his head until his golden eye was level with Krivat's face, and a soft, harmonious rumble emerged from his chest, a sound no Kriarian had ever heard during official ceremonies. He remembers, Cal confirmed. You were the only one who ever asked if he was happy. He never forgot that. Something that might have been a smile briefly crossed the arch-theologian's austere features. Perhaps there is more wisdom in questioning than in certainty, he murmured almost to himself. Then, with a formal bow to Zell noticeably different from the ritualized prostration of earlier, he departed with his entourage. When the Imperial shuttles had vanished into the distance, Tharok turned to Cal with genuine amazement. How did you know about Krivat's secret visit? Even I had never heard that story. Cal smiled. I didn't, but Zell did. He remembers every individual who has ever approached him with genuine intent, rather than ritual obligation. Krivat's visit made an impression precisely because it was so rare. You took an enormous risk, Vazik noted. If you had been wrong. But I wasn't, Cal replied simply. Because I trust Zell's memory and his judgment. That's what partnership means, mutual trust based on genuine understanding. Zen looked thoughtful. You've accomplished in one conversation what decades of scientific evidence could not. You've made Krivat question his own dogma. The Theological Council's support could transform our response to this crisis. Don't overestimate the conversion, Tharok warned. Krivat may be personally shaken, but the theological establishment has millennia of tradition reinforcing its power. There will be resistance. There always is, Cal acknowledged. But we've made a start. And more importantly, we've gained time to continue our preparations while the political maneuvering unfolds. As if to emphasize the point, Zell stretched his massive wings and launched himself skyward again, circling the preserve in a display of power and freedom that no ceremonial flight had ever permitted. The crystalline structures on his head pulsed with energy, sending out dimensional pulses that were visible even to normal sight, as rippling distortions in the air. He's scanning, Cal explained, extending his senses beyond Kriaris, searching for the first traces of the approaching anomaly. With his abilities fully unleashed, he can detect dimensional disturbances light years away. Tharok watched the majestic creature soaring above them, his perspective forever altered. All these cycles we thought we were honoring him with our rituals and restrictions. In reality, we were caging our greatest asset. Not just an asset, Cal corrected gently. A partner. Remember that distinction, Chief Warden. It makes all the difference. As the Kriarians began revising their plans to incorporate Krivat's unexpected support, Cal took a moment to observe Zell's flight with private satisfaction. Their reunion had been centuries in the making, but it had come at precisely the right moment, not just for them, but potentially for an entire civilization teetering between stagnation and renewal. The tiny human and the apex predator together again against impossible odds. Just like old times, except this time, they might reshape an empire in the process of saving it. With the unexpected alliance of arch-theologian Krivat, preparations accelerated over the following days. Ancient texts were re-examined with fresh eyes, revealing practical information that had been obscured by centuries of metaphorical interpretation. What had been described as the Emperor's sacred spear of starlight turned out to be a technological device designed to stabilize dimensional boundaries, surprisingly similar to Earth's current technology, suggesting parallel development or possibly shared origins. Cal divided his time between working with Dr. Zen to integrate Earth's dimensional stabilization protocols with Kriarian systems and conducting extensive field tests with Zell to map his enhanced abilities. The great predator's dimensional senses proved even more acute than either had anticipated, able to detect subtle fluctuations at distances previously thought impossible. He's functioning at peak capacity now, Cal explained to Tharok during one assessment session. Freedom and purpose have awakened abilities that were dormant during his centuries of ceremonial confinement. The rock had undergone a transformation nearly as dramatic as Zell's. The rigid adherence to protocol that had defined his early interactions with Cal had given way to pragmatic adaptability. He now addressed Zell directly when asking questions, no longer going through formal invocations or treating the predator as a semi-divine entity. "Can he locate the precise position of the anomaly?" the rock asked, studying the holographic maps they had constructed based on Zell's sensing. "Yes and no," Cal replied. "He can detect its general approach vector, but the anomaly exists partly outside normal spacetime. It's like tracking a shark by its wake rather than seeing the creature itself. And these void harvesters have his scans confirmed their presence." Cal's expression grew serious. "He's detected energy patterns consistent with conscious guidance, but not identifiable entities. Whatever is directing the anomaly remains hidden behind the dimensional distortion itself." 7 days into their preparations, Dr. Zen made a breakthrough while correlating Zell's sensory data with astronomical observations. The anomaly wasn't moving at a constant rate. It was accelerating, and on a trajectory more precisely targeted toward Criaris than initially calculated. "At current acceleration, it will reach our outer defense perimeter in 8 days, not 15, she reported grimly. "And the precision of its course adjustment suggests intentionality beyond any natural phenomenon." The rock immediately escalated their timeline, securing an emergency audience with the Emperor for the following day. The meeting would include arch-theologian Krevat, whose research into the ancient texts had unearthed critical historical accounts of the previous encounter with similar entities. "The Emperor must understand that this threatens not just our current civilization, but our entire history," Thurrock explained to Cal. "If these void harvesters succeed, they won't just destroy Criaris. They'll erase our dimensional anchor points, effectively removing us from the cosmic narrative." Cal nodded soberly. "That's consistent with Earth's theoretical models. These entities don't just consume energy, they consume possibility itself. When they harvest a civilization, they don't just end its future, they destabilize its past." The implications were staggering, not mere extinction, but retroactive non-existence. The stakes could not be higher. The Imperial Audience Chamber was designed to intimidate. Soaring columns of polished obsidian rose to a vaulted ceiling, adorned with constellations rendered in precious metals. The red throne itself, carved from a single crystal of deep crimson, sat atop a dais of 27 steps, each representing a major house of the Criarian aristocracy. Thurrock led their delegation, which included Dr. Zen arch-theologian Krevat, and to the shock of the imperial court, Cal himself. The presence of an alien in the sacred chamber caused immediate murmurs of disapproval, but these were silenced by a gesture from the throne. Emperor Joral Carax was younger than his position might suggest, barely into his 3rd century, relatively youthful for a Criarian ruler. His scales gleamed a vibrant crimson gold, marking his direct descent from the imperial bloodline, but his eyes held an intelligence that transcended mere hereditary authority. Chief Warden. The Emperor acknowledged his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast chamber. "Your request for emergency audience cited existential threat requiring immediate imperial action. Explain." Thurrock bowed formally, then launched into a concise summary of the approaching anomaly, supported by Dr. Zen's scientific data and arch-theologian Krevat's historical research. He concluded by introducing Cal as Earth's envoy, who brought both warning and technical assistance. Throughout this presentation, the Emperor remained impassive, betraying neither acceptance nor skepticism. When Thurrock finished, the chamber fell into expectant silence. "Interesting," Emperor Carax said finally. "You present me with an invisible threat detected by technologies we do not fully understand, corroborated by ancient texts, previously considered allegorical, and verified by a creature from a planet with which we have no formal relations." His eyes fixed on Cal. "You ask much of imperial credulity, Chief Warden." Before Thurrock could respond, Arch-theologian Krivat stepped forward, a breach of protocol that caused gasps throughout the chamber. Imperial Majesty, I shared your skepticism initially, but the evidence is compelling, particularly when the original texts are examined without the interpretive layer of later theological traditions. The Emperor raised an eyebrow in surprise. You, arch-theologian, questioning theological tradition. This is unexpected. Not questioning Imperial Majesty, contextualizing, Krivat replied carefully. The earliest accounts of the first Emperor's covenant with the Starfang described a partnership against cosmic entities called the Void Devourers. Over centuries, this account became ritualized into the religious framework we know today. But the original threat may now be returning. Emperor Carax leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. And the Starfang? What role does our guardian play in this theory? Here, Cal stepped forward, bowing with perfect adherence to Imperial protocol. With your permission, Imperial Majesty, that question might be better answered by Zell himself. Zell, the Emperor repeated, momentarily confused. The being you call the Starfang, Imperial Majesty, Cal explained. His actual name is Zellerin, or Zell for brevity. He is not a mystical guardian sent by cosmic deities, but a sentient being of a species adapted to perceive and navigate dimensional boundaries. He chose to protect Kriaris centuries ago, forming a partnership with your ancestor, a partnership that has since been ritualized into religious observance. Murmurs of outrage rippled through the imperial court, but the Emperor silenced them with another gesture. Extraordinary, claims Earth Envoy. What evidence supports this revision of our foundational history? With respect, Imperial Majesty, I suggest we allow Zell to present his own evidence, Cal replied. He awaits your permission to enter the Imperial presence, not as a ceremonial guardian, but as a conscious ally with crucial information about the approaching threat. The Emperor considered this for a long moment, then nodded. Let the Starfang, let Zell enter. The massive doors at the chamber's end swung open, revealing Zell in all his magnificent power. Unlike previous imperial ceremonies, where the Starfang would enter with measured ritual steps, Zell strode into the chamber with natural predatory grace. The crystalline horns on his head pulsed with energy, casting prismatic patterns across the obsidian walls. Court officials scrambled out of his path, unaccustomed to the Guardian, moving with such purpose and proximity. When Zell reached the center of the chamber, he did not perform the traditional obeisance to the throne. Instead, he met the Emperor's gaze directly, one apex entity acknowledging another. Imperial Majesty. Cal said, moving to stand beside his old friend. Zell has detected dimensional disturbances, consistent with the approach of entities your ancestors called Void Devourers, beings that exist partially outside normal space-time, and feed on the energy released when dimensional barriers are breached. They are drawn to civilizations with high energy outputs, and Kriaris has been broadcasting its technological signature for centuries. The Emperor studied Zell with new intensity. You claim this being can communicate its knowledge to you. Yes, Imperial Majesty. Through a combination of vocalizations, electromagnetic signals, and shared experience. Zell and I traveled together centuries ago before he came to Kriaris. I understand his language as he understands mine. Then, let him speak, the Emperor commanded. Let our guardian tell us directly of this threat. Cal nodded to Zell, who raised his massive head toward the vaulted ceiling. The crystalline structures began to glow with increasing brightness, and suddenly, the chamber was filled with a display more vivid than any imperial holographic technology could produce, a three-dimensional representation of space surrounding Kriaris, with a writhing distortion approaching from the outer reaches of the system. As the court watched in stunned silence, the display zoomed in on the anomaly, revealing its complex structure, not a simple tear in space, but a deliberately engineered construct of dimensional fractures, arranged in patterns that suggested artificial design rather than natural formation. What we're seeing is Zell's direct perception of dimensional space, Cal explained. The approaching anomaly is not a natural phenomenon, but a weapon or more accurately, a harvesting tool. The entities guiding it use dimensional disruption to extract energy from civilizations at their peak development. The Emperor rose from the Red Throne, descending several steps for a better view of the display. And these entities, they targeted Kriaris before during the reign of the first Emperor. Yes, Imperial Majesty. Krivat confirmed, consulting an ancient text he had brought from the restricted archives. According to these original accounts written in the first Emperor's own hand, the Devourers between stars approached Kriaris shortly after our first interstellar experiments. The Emperor formed an alliance with a cosmic hunter, clearly the being we now call the Starfang, to drive them back. But not destroy them, Cal added. The entities retreated beyond dimensional perception. Now, with Kriaris's technological development advancing rapidly in recent centuries, they've returned to complete their interrupted harvest. The Emperor's expression hardened. If my ancestor defeated these entities with far less advanced technology, surely our current capabilities are more than equal to the task. Dr. Zen stepped forward cautiously. With respect, Imperial Majesty, your ancestor had two critical advantages. We currently lack an accurate understanding of the threat's nature and a true partnership with Zell. Our modern defenses are designed for conventional warfare, not dimensional disruption. Which is why Earth has offered assistance, Cal continued. We've encountered similar anomalies in other sectors and developed technologies specifically designed to stabilize dimensional boundaries. Combined with Zell's natural abilities and Kriarian defense systems, we believe we can repel this incursion, but only with full Imperial authorization and resources. Emperor Karax returned to his throne, his expression thoughtful. You speak of partnership with the Starfang with Zell. Yet our entire Imperial structure is built around the cosmic covenant between my bloodline and the Divine Guardian. If that covenant is reinterpreted as you suggest, what becomes of Imperial authority? It was a shrewd question, political rather than existential. The Emperor recognized that changing Kriarian's understanding of the Starfang would inevitably alter the religious foundation of Imperial power. Imperial Majesty, Cal replied carefully. The covenant was real, just not in the way later generations interpreted it. Your ancestor and Zell formed a genuine alliance based on mutual respect and shared purpose. That alliance proved powerful enough to save Kriaris once before. It can do so again, but only if we acknowledge its true nature. Zell, who had maintained the dimensional display throughout this exchange, now shifted it to show a new image. A Kriarian figure standing shoulder to shoulder with a younger version of himself, facing the same writhing distortion they had just witnessed. The image was clearly symbolic rather than literal, given the size disparity, but its meaning was unmistakable: partnership, not hierarchy. The first Emperor understood what later generations forgot, Cal explained. Zell chose to protect Kriaris, not as a divine duty, but as a conscious decision. He remained even after the initial threat was repelled, because he found purpose here, and perhaps because he recognized that the Void Harvesters might someday return. For several long moments the Emperor was silent, weighing implications that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of dynastic decision. The Imperial line of Karax has ruled for 10,000 cycles, based on the Divine Covenant. To suddenly declare that covenant, a political alliance, would undermine millennia of tradition. He paused, studying Zell with newfound awareness. And yet tradition that cannot adapt to truth is doomed to eventual failure. The Emperor rose again, addressing not just the delegation before him, but the entire court. Kriaris faces an existential threat. Whether you accept the theological interpretation or this new historical understanding, the fact remains that our guardian, divine or otherwise, warns us of approaching danger. As Emperor, my duty is to ensure the survival of our civilization. All other considerations are secondary. He descended the steps of the dais completely, an unprecedented action that caused murmurs throughout the chamber, and approached Zell directly. If you are indeed a sentient being who has chosen to protect our world, Emperor Karax, said, addressing the massive predator, directly for the first time in historical memory. "Then Criaris owes you a debt beyond ceremonial acknowledgement. I ask now, not as Emperor to Guardian, but as one thinking being to another. Will you help us face this threat as our ally?" Zell lowered his enormous head until his golden eyes were level with the Emperor's. For a moment, the two regarded each other in silent communication. Then, with deliberate slowness, Zell extended one massive foreclaw palm upward before the Emperor. Cal smiled at the gesture. In Zell's culture, extending an open claw represents trust and commitment, a physical symbol of partnership. He's offering you the same alliance he once formed with your ancestor. Without hesitation, Emperor Carax placed his hand upon the massive claw, creating a scene so powerful and unexpected that many court officials gasped audibly. Then, let it be known throughout the Empire the covenant is renewed not as divine mandate, but as conscious alliance between equals. Turning back to the assembly, the Emperor's voice rang with newfound authority. "Prepare our defenses, integrate Earth's technology with our systems, and let our ally lead the response as he sees fit with the full support of Imperial resources." The declaration was revolutionary, threatening centuries of theological doctrine and Imperial protocol. Yet the immediate crisis provided justification that even the most conservative elements could not openly reject. In the face of extinction, innovation became necessary rather than heretical. As the Imperial Court dissolved into urgent activity, with officials rushing to implement the Emperor's directives, Cal found a moment of quiet conversation with Thurok and Zell, away from the main commotion. "That went better than expected," Cal observed. "I anticipated more resistance from the Imperial establishment." "The resistance will come later," Thurok predicted. "Once the crisis passes, assuming we survive, the Theological Council will attempt to reinterpret today's events to preserve their authority." Cal smiled. "Perhaps. But paradigms once shifted rarely return to their original position. The Criarians who witness Zell acting as a conscious ally, rather than a divine symbol, will never see him quite the same way again." Zell rumbled in agreement, the sound vibrating through the obsidian floor beneath them. Through their electromagnetic connection, he conveyed a complex sentiment to Cal, satisfaction at finally being recognized for what he truly was, coupled with anticipation of the coming confrontation. "He's ready," Cal translated for Thurok's benefit. "More ready than he's been in centuries. Fighting alongside your ancestors against the Void Harvesters was the last time he used his abilities to their fullest extent. He's eager to fulfill his true purpose again." Thurok studied the massive predator with newfound respect. "To think all these cycles we believed we were honoring him with our rituals, when all we were doing was constraining him." "Not entirely," Cal corrected gently. "Your reverence may have been misplaced, but it was genuine. Zell always understood that. It's why he stayed even as his role became increasingly ceremonial." As Imperial technicians began pouring into the chamber with equipment for the defense preparations, Cal placed his hand on Zell's foreleg, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the gleaming scales. "Just like old times, brother," he murmured, "facing impossible odds together." Zell lowered his massive head to gently nudge Cal's shoulder, a gesture of affection that would have terrified any Criarian observer just days ago, but now represented the visible proof of the partnership that might save their world. The final confrontation came sooner than even their accelerated calculations had predicted. 5 days after the Imperial audience, as defense preparations were still being finalized, Zell's dimensional senses detected a sudden surge in the anomaly's approach vector. "They know we're preparing," Cal explained urgently to the assembled Imperial Council. "The Void Harvesters have accelerated their timeline in response to our defensive activities." Dr. Zen's monitoring systems confirmed the assessment. "The dimensional fissure will reach our outer defense perimeter within 6 hours, less than half our projected timeline." Emperor Carax, who had abandoned traditional protocol to personally oversee the defense coordination, made an immediate decision. Deploy all available resources now. We cannot afford to wait for optimal positioning. Kriarian defense ships launched from planetary installations, their conventional weapons supplemented with Earth's dimensional stabilization technology. The hybrid systems had been hastily integrated with Dr. Zen and her team working around the clock to ensure compatibility. Meanwhile, ground-based generators began creating a dimensional reinforcement field around Kriaris itself, a last line of defense should the space-based operations fail. At the center of these preparations stood Zell and Cal. The Apex Predator had been equipped with a specialized harness, a collaboration between Earth and Kriarian engineering that amplified his natural dimensional abilities, while protecting him from the destructive effects of the anomaly. Cal would ride with him, coordinating the overall defense strategy through a neural interface that linked their combined awareness to the command centers on Kriaris. As they prepared for launch from the Imperial Citadel's highest spire, Tharok approached for a final consultation. "Our ships are in position," he reported. "The dimensional stabilizers are charged and ready. But our targeting systems cannot lock onto the anomaly directly. It exists partially outside our detection parameters." "That's where Zell comes in," Cal explained, adjusting the final connections on the specialized harness. "He can perceive the anomaly's true position and structure. Through our neural link, he'll guide your weapons to the dimensional weak points." Tharok nodded, then hesitated before adding, "The theologians have been conducting traditional ceremonies throughout the Empire. I know you don't subscribe to their interpretations, but the rituals provide comfort to the population. I hope you don't find it offensive." Cal smiled. "Not at all. People find meaning where they need it, especially in times of crisis. Besides, Zell rather enjoys some of the ceremonial chants, says they have interesting harmonic patterns." The Chief Warden seemed relieved by this acceptance. "Good hunting, then. May your partnership prove as powerful as the legends suggest." As Tharok departed to oversee the ground defenses, Cal completed the final adjustments to the harness and climbed onto Zell's back, settling into the specially designed seat that would secure him during high-speed aerial maneuvers. "Ready, old friend?" he asked, feeling the Predator's muscles tense with anticipation beneath him. Zell's response came through their electromagnetic connection, a surge of confidence and determination that transcended verbal communication. The crystalline structures on his head began to glow with increasing intensity, pulsing in rhythm with the dimensional scans he was already conducting. With a powerful thrust of his massive legs, Zell launched from the Imperial Spire, his great wings unfurling to catch the upper atmospheric currents. As they soared toward the edge of space, Cal activated the neural interface, merging his consciousness partially with Zell's expansive sensory field. The experience was overwhelming at first dimensional perception, beyond normal human capability, showing layers of reality that existed alongside conventional spacetime. Through Zell's senses, Cal could see the approaching anomaly in its true form, not merely a distortion, but a complex engineered construct of twisted dimensional barriers, guided by entities that existed in the spaces between realities. "Command Center, this is Cal," he transmitted through the communication system. "We have visual confirmation of the anomaly. It's unlike anything in our theoretical models. The Void Harvesters have evolved their technology since their last encounter with Kriaris." Emperor Karax's voice responded personally. "Can we defeat it? Tell me honestly, Earth Envoy." Through the neural link, Cal consulted with Zell, analyzing the anomaly's structure against their combined experience and knowledge. "Yes, Imperial Majesty," Cal replied finally. "But not through conventional victory. We need to collapse the dimensional bridges they're using to maintain control. That means striking precisely at coordinates. Zell will provide an exact sequence. Any deviation could catastrophically destabilize local spacetime instead of repelling the harvesters." "Understood. All defense forces are instructed to follow your targeting data without question or delay." As they approached the outer defense perimeter, The full Crearian fleet came into view, hundreds of ships arranged in concentric defensive formations, their weapons modified with Earth's stabilization technology. Beyond them, the fabric of space itself seemed to writhe and distort as the anomaly advanced. Through Zell's perception, Cal could now see what conventional sensors could not: tendrils of non-dimensional energy extending from the anomaly toward Criaris, probing the planet's defenses and beginning the harvesting process that would eventually consume the civilization's energy. "They've started," Cal transmitted urgently. "All ships prepare to receive targeting data. Dr. Zen, activate the ground-based reinforcement field at maximum capacity." Zell soared higher, positioning himself at the optimal vantage point above the defensive formation. The crystalline structures on his head blazed with energy as he extended his senses fully into the dimensional boundary layers, mapping the anomaly's structure and identifying its vulnerable nodes. Through their neural link, Cal translated this complex sensory data into targeting coordinates, transmitting them to the waiting fleet. First sequence initiating. Target points Alpha through Delta. Fire on my mark. The battle unfolded across multiple layers of reality simultaneously. In conventional space, Crearian weapons fired precise bursts of modified energy at seemingly empty coordinates. But in the dimensional boundary layers that Zell perceived, these strikes impacted critical junctures in the anomaly's structure, disrupting the Void Harvester's control mechanisms. The entities responded immediately, redirecting the anomaly's approach and strengthening the dimensional barriers around its core. Through Zell's perception, Cal could sense their confusion. They had expected the same primitive defenses they had encountered centuries ago, not this coordinated dimensional assault. "They're adapting," Cal reported, "shifting their dimensional frequency to avoid our targeting parameters. Zell is tracking the changes, new coordinates transmitting now." For hours, the battle continued in this manner, a cosmic dance of attack and counterattack across dimensional boundaries that most Crearians could not even perceive. Zell's abilities proved crucial, allowing the defense forces to target their weapons with precision that would have been impossible through conventional sensors. But the Void Harvesters were relentless, probing for weaknesses in the defensive strategy. When direct confrontation failed, they shifted tactics, splitting the anomaly into multiple smaller fissures that approached from different vectors, forcing the defense fleet to divide its attention. "They're trying to overwhelm our coordination capacity," Cal transmitted, as Zell banked sharply to maintain his optimal sensory position. "We need to consolidate our approach. All ships form into unified firing groups and target only the primary nodes I'm identifying now." The strategy worked temporarily, forcing the fractured anomalies to recombine for greater effect. But this recombination created a surge of dimensional energy that washed over the defense fleet, disrupting the modified weapon systems on several ships. "Engineering teams, recalibrate your stabilizers to frequency range Zeta 9. Dr. Zen's voice cut through the communication chatter. "The surge pattern follows a predictable oscillation we can counteract." As the battle approached its 6th hour, both sides showed signs of fatigue. The Crearian fleet had suffered damage to nearly a third of its ships, while the ground-based reinforcement field fluctuated under the strain of continuous operation. Meanwhile, the anomaly's advance had slowed, but not halted its structure, becoming more concentrated as the Void Harvesters focused their remaining energy on a final push toward Criaris. Through their neural link, Cal sensed Zell's growing understanding of the Harvester's strategy. They were not merely attacking randomly, but systematically targeting the weakest points in Crearian dimensional space areas, where previous technological experiments had already thinned the boundaries between realities. "They're using our own developmental history against us," Cal realized. "Every spot where Crearian scientists conducted dimensional research has created a vulnerability they're exploiting." This insight provided a crucial advantage. If the Harvesters were targeting these specific weak points, then reinforcing them would force a change in strategy that might create an opening for a decisive counterattack. "Dr. Zen," Cal transmitted, Redirect the ground generators to these specific coordinates. They're pre-existing dimensional soft spots from previous scientific experiments. As the reinforcement fields intensified around these vulnerable locations, the anomaly's advance faltered noticeably. The void harvesters, confronted with unexpectedly strengthened barriers at their targeted entry points, began to concentrate their energy on a single location, a final desperate attempt to breach Crearian space. "They're committing fully to one approach vector," Cal reported. "This is our opportunity. All ships prepare for coordinated strike on my mark." Zell soared directly toward the concentration point, his crystalline horns blazing with accumulated dimensional energy. Through their neural link, Cal could sense his intention not merely to guide the fleet's weapons, but to personally engage the dimensional boundary at its weakest point. "Zell, that's too dangerous," Cal warned through their private connection. "The dimensional backlash could destroy you." The Predator's response came not in words, but in emotions and memories, centuries of purpose fulfilled and denied, the joy of their reunion, and an unwavering commitment to protecting the world he had chosen as home. Beneath it all ran a simple truth. This was what he was born to do. "All ships hold position," Cal transmitted, his voice tight with emotion. He's going to attempt a direct dimensional interface. Stand by to fire on the coordinates I transmit after his engagement." Before anyone could question this unexpected change in strategy, Zell accelerated toward the anomaly's concentration point, his massive wings propelling him at speeds that strained the harness's structural integrity. Cal held on grimly, knowing that separating now would break their neural link when it was most crucial. As they approached the writhing heart of the anomaly, Zell's crystalline structures began emitting a harmonic frequency that resonated with the dimensional boundaries themselves. Through their shared perception, Cal could see what was happening. Zell was not attacking the anomaly directly, but singing to it, producing vibrational patterns that mimicked the dimensional language of his own species. "He's communicating with them," Cal transmitted in awe. "Not fighting, talking." The harmonic resonance intensified as Zell maintained position at the anomaly's edge, his massive body absorbing dimensional energy that would have destroyed conventional matter. Through their neural link, Cal experienced fragments of the exchange, not words, but concepts transmitted through dimensional frequencies. The void harvesters were not mindless consumers, but ancient intelligences that perceived advanced civilizations as energy patterns rather than conscious entities. They harvested these patterns when they reached peak complexity, considering it a natural cycle rather than destruction. Zell was attempting to convey a revolutionary concept to them, that Crearian consciousness represented more than exploitable energy, that their harvesting destroyed something irreplaceable. For several tense minutes, this dimensional dialogue continued, with Zell absorbing increasing amounts of harmful energy as he maintained the connection. Cal could feel the neural link fluctuating as the Predator's systems strained under the pressure. "Zell, you can't sustain this," he warned privately. "Your biological structure isn't designed for this level of dimensional exposure." In response, Zell conveyed a final request through their connection coordinates for the fleet to target not to destroy the anomaly, but to precisely modulate it, changing its dimensional frequency to one that could not interact with Crearian space. "All ships," Cal transmitted, his voice urgent. "Now, target these exact coordinates with modified stabilization beams at frequency Omega-7. Don't destroy modulate. Fire now." The fleet responded instantly, their combined weapons creating a precisely calibrated wave of dimensional energy that washed through the anomaly. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen in conventional space, but through Zell's perception, Cal witnessed a transformation in the dimensional structure. The writhing distortion began to shift, its frequency changing until it no longer resonated with Crearian reality. With a final harmonic pulse that shook the neural link to its core, Zell broke away from the anomaly, wings straining as he turned back toward Crearis. Behind them, the dimensional fissure didn't collapse, but rather translated shifting into a frequency range that made it effectively invisible and harmless to Criarian space. "They're leaving," Cal transmitted, struggling to maintain consciousness, as feedback from Zell's strained system washed through their connection. Not destroyed, but redirected. Zell convinced them to seek energy patterns in uninhabited space instead. Cheers erupted across the communication channels as the defense fleet confirmed the anomaly's retreat. On Criaris, crowds gathered in public spaces watched in awe as the distortion that had been visible even to conventional sensors gradually faded from detection. But Cal had no attention to spare for celebration. Through their neural link, he could feel Zell's systems shutting down one by one, overwhelmed by dimensional exposure beyond what even his specialized biology could tolerate. "Emergency medical team to landing zone Alpha," Cal transmitted as they descended toward Criaris. "Zell is in critical condition. Prepare for dimensional radiation treatment according to Earth protocol, Theta 6. The landing was rough, Zell's magnificent wings barely able to control their descent in his weakened state. As they touched down on the Imperial Plaza, the great predator collapsed, his massive body shuddering with dimensional aftershocks. Cal disconnected from the neural interface and scrambled to Zell's side, placing his hands on the predator's heaving flank. The crystalline structures that had blazed so brightly during the battle now flickered erratically, their energy nearly depleted. "Stay with me, brother," Cal urged, his voice breaking with emotion. "You've done enough, more than enough. Rest now, and let us help you." Dr. Zen arrived with a team of Criarian scientists and Earth specialists who had been included in the defense preparations. They quickly deployed modified stabilization equipment around Zell's prone form, creating a localized field to draw out the harmful dimensional energy. "His systems are saturated with cross-dimensional radiation," Zen reported after initial scans. "It's disrupting his cellular cohesion at a quantum level." "Can you stabilize him?" Cal demanded, refusing to leave his friend's side, despite his own exposure symptoms. "We're trying," Zen replied grimly. "But we've never treated a being of his species before. His dimensional biology is beyond our understanding." Emperor Carax arrived personally, dismissing his security detail to kneel beside the fallen guardian. "Whatever resources you require, whatever knowledge Earth can provide, name it, and the Empire will provide it." He turned to Cal with genuine concern. "He saved us all. We cannot lose him now." Cal looked up at the Emperor, seeing not the Imperial authority, but a leader who had begun to understand the true meaning of partnership. "There's one possibility," he said slowly, "but it requires something your Empire has never permitted." "Name it," the Emperor repeated without hesitation. "Zell needs to return to the dimensional frequency of his home realm temporarily to heal. It's a place between conventional reality states, where his species originated. I can guide him there, but we would need to create a controlled dimensional portal, something your theological restrictions have forbidden for millennia." The Emperor didn't even pause to consider. "Dr. Zen, begin preparations immediately. Archtheologian Cravat will provide any necessary religious exemptions." Cravat, who had arrived with the Emperor, nodded solemnly. "The ancient texts speak of the stellar homeland of the Divine Guardian. We misinterpreted it as metaphorical, but perhaps it referred to this dimensional realm you describe." For the next several hours, Criarian and Earth scientists worked frantically to construct a stable, dimensional portal, using modified versions of the technology that had repelled the anomaly. Cal remained by Zell's side throughout, monitoring his deteriorating condition and maintaining their connection through increasingly faint electromagnetic signals. "Hold on, old friend," Cal murmured as the portal technology neared completion. "Just a little longer." When the portal finally stabilized, a shimmering oval of dimensional energy that revealed glimpses of a reality state beyond conventional perception, Cal turned to the assembled Criarians. "I don't know how long his healing will take," he explained. "It could be days or it could be centuries by your time perception. Dimensional realms don't experience temporality the way we do." "Will he return?" Emperor Carax asked, giving voice to the concern that had spread throughout the Empire as news of their guardian's condition circulated. Cal smiled faintly. That will be his choice. Zell chose Kriaris once before because he found purpose here. If that purpose remains, if your empire continues to evolve its understanding of him, I believe he will return. With the help of Tharok and several guards, they carefully moved Zell's massive form into position before the portal. The effort was tremendous, even with anti-gravity assistance, as the great predator's unconscious body weighed several tons. As they completed the positioning, Cal climbed once more onto Zell's back, settling between his shoulder ridges, in a position that had become natural over their centuries of companionship. "You're going with him?" Tharok asked in surprise. "Of course," Cal replied simply. "We began our journey together. We'll continue it together at least until he's healed. Then perhaps we'll both return to see how Kriaris has evolved in our absence." The Emperor stepped forward, placing his hand on Zell's foreleg, in the same gesture of alliance he had made days earlier in the Imperial Chamber. "The covenant between Kriaris and Zell will remain open, not as divine mandate, but as mutual respect between allies. Whether it takes days or centuries, we will remember what we have learned, that true strength comes not from reverence, but from partnership." Cal nodded in appreciation, then activated the final sequence that would draw them through the portal. As dimensional energy enveloped them, he had one last glimpse of the assembled Kriarians, not bowing in worship, but standing in respect, acknowledging Zell not as a divine guardian, but as a conscious ally who had chosen to protect them. The tiny human and the apex predator disappeared into the shimmering portal, leaving behind an empire forever changed by their brief reunion. The ceremonies would continue, the traditions would evolve, but the fundamental understanding had shifted irrevocably. The being they had worshipped for millennia had never been a god, but something perhaps more remarkable, a conscious entity who had chosen them, protected them, and ultimately sacrificed himself for them, not out of divine obligation, but out of free will. And somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, Cal and Zell began the slow process of healing and recovery. Their bond formed centuries ago when a tiny human had rescued a juvenile predator from certain death, proving once again that true connection transcends size, species, and the very fabric of reality itself. In time, perhaps they would return to witness how the Kriarian Empire had evolved in their absence. Or perhaps they would embark on new adventures across the cosmos, the tiny human and his brother, the apex predator, who had once been mockingly dismissed until the truth of their bond had transformed an empire. The twin sons of Kriaris continued their eternal dance across the sky, illuminating an empire in transformation, an empire that had learned at long last that the smallest entities can sometimes forge the mightiest connections.